Please be seated. The Secretary will read the order.
Debate on vote number 23, defense including vote number 26, military veterans appropriation bill.
I now invite the Honorable Minister of Defence and Military Veterans to introduce the debate. The Honorable Minister.
Chairperson, honorable members, Acting Secretary for Defense, Chief of SANDF, Acting DG for DMV, ladies and gentlemen. The future is clearly not very predictable these days. We witness political, economic, and social stress on the increase. We see the re-emergence of global ideological contestation. At a continental level, we accept that the legacy and indeed the resurgence of modernized colonization is on the return, with persistent disputed sovereign and territorial issues abounding. We see the rise of political instability and the rise of coup d'etats, especially around the western side of the continent. The global drive to access Africa's resources continues to result in the poor progress with the on the continent resource harnessing, beneficiation, and consumption. So, Africa continues to experience severe socioeconomic disparities, instability, violent ethnic and religious extremism. Closer to home, our slow economic growth impacts negatively on our infrastructure development, maintenance, and expansion. Joblessness has increased social dependence on the state. Criminal behavior, corruption, they deter and they retard our progress, which leads to people being jobless, people depending more, and people turning to violent reaction towards neighbors, towards the state, and towards their own family members. This does not help us in any way to realize our true ideal of a true democratic South Africa, which is united and diverse. Chairperson, the DoD baseline for the 2022-23 budget was increased by 2.5 billion to 51.6 billion through the adjusted estimates. I need to point out that as we concluded at the end of March 2023, the unaudited actual expenditure was 54.6 billion. Which means that we were over the 100% expenditure. And I point this out because when we look at the cost of employment, we will realize that we are definitely terribly underfunded there. And that is the cause of why we would overexpend there. In 2022, SANDF continued to participate in the various regional security initiatives. We're still at the UN mission in the DRC. We are still the lead element in Mozambique, in Samim. We continue to safeguard our borders. We continue to be on standby for humanitarian aid and disaster relief within South Africa and with our neighboring countries. The 2 new inshore patrol boats have been put to good use along our coasts. Members will remember that we are expecting 2 more, and then we will start trying to lobby for funds to get the ones that go deeper, hopefully bigger, more of a deterrent nature. Speaker, Chairperson, we continue to be at the borderline, as I said. For this year, we have received 51.1 billion, which is now translating to 500 million less than the previous budget. We have set aside 30.6 billion for compensation of employees, because this still leaves us underfunded by 2.6 billion if you count the actual boots on the ground. We have set aside 8.6 billion. AMSCO will get 1.5 of this. Accommodation, leases, municipal levies and services will take 2.8 billion. The airlift capability repair of the Navy defense systems will take a 1.5 billion. The mission in the DRC will take another billion. Mozambique will take 850 million. And this has resulted in the production of the Future Strategic Division Direction. This includes evaluating the 2015 Defense Review and producing a revised level of defense ambition and a revised strategic trajectory to be submitted to the JCPS cluster before March 2024. The future RSA Defense and Security Policy Concept document is taking into account the security and environment constraints facing the defense function. That is also being developed. The future military capstones will be providing the strategy on how to pursue the national defense security. Now, the Chief Sandaf calls that the journey to greatness. It prioritizes nation building, safeguarding, and building internal stability, securing the regional development and creating regional security, enhancing cyber resilience, providing and enhancing hard power capability for SANDF through a small but core major combat capability that is relevant and ready to meet future conflict challenges. I intend to bring this to the committees in the next 4 months for a discussion and for further inputs. I trust, Chairperson, that journey to greatness will begin to optimize on our border function, will enable us to establish a rapid reaction capability, will enable us to establish a maintenance, repair, and overall capability to maintain the legacy systems, and we will also be able to revisit the soldier, the needs, secure, and happy, and proud to be in the employ and service of South Africans. We need to also understand that unless we do this, we will not be able to arrest the decay in the defense. We need a military practice that must inform how we structure SANDF into the future, how we coordinate combat formations and control, how we enable commanders to take responsibility, how we deal with issues between the commanders and the civilian part of the department. We need to do this because the Secretariat is under fire. The Chief of Defense Force is under fire. When you go to our end state 3, Chairperson, you will realize that we have findings as by the Auditor General. For the financial year 21-22, we were audited and on 4 balances were found to be irregular. Now, excluding those matters of underfunding, in 2022-23, we have incurred unaudited irregularities of 1 million in fruitless and wasteful expenditure, in 475 million in irregular expenditure, We have received 9 material irregularities from the Auditor General as at the end of 22-23. Now, due to the underfunding of the cost of employment, we are likely to be overexpending 3 billion in the current financial year. So we are in constant engagement with the Secretary to make sure that whatever it is that we think, and we have traced the problems of irregularities straight back to procurement. So the Secretary for Defense acting has been instructed to look and to find solutions. We have done so. The whole procurement system has been reviewed. The identification of lack of skills amongst those who are responsible for procurement is identified. An agreement has been signed with the School of Governance to train soldiers who are responsible for procurement, so that we go right down to where the misstatements and misreporting happens and begin to cure it from there. I do know that I had threatened at some point to dock and to reduce the financial delegations for as low as we can, so that we can begin to trace what happens where. We're also not saying that if we train rigorously those who are responsible in logistics and procurement, we will cure this. But we are saying that those who will not adhere to what they are told to do, then they must be dealt with without any mercy. Because a defense force which cannot look after its own resources cannot in the long term be responsible for taking care of the bigger business that is looking after the resources of South Africa. I think that when we do that, we also are, and we have discussed with the president, that we might be bringing in the SIU. We might be bringing not only in DOD specific, we will also take it into a DMV, because we want to make sure that what was done in the past is corrected. But before you correct something, you must understand why it is happening and how frequent it is happening and who. So we're trying to deal with that. We want to say that one of those things is dealing with suspensions, because there we are a bit untidy, because sometimes for the same post you are paying twice. So we're looking into that. We're also looking at filling in, firstly, the vacancies in the civilian side. We are also saying that we are almost at the point where we must constitute the interview panel to replace both the CFO and the Secretary for Defense. So we think that we should be doing. We want to say that this Chief of the Defense Force has been instructed to find ways to rejuvenate SANDF. It is not just about recruiting young people. It is also about looking at systems, upgrading, rejuvenating the capabilities, finding ways of preserving and maintaining. So we think that our legacy systems will be what we need to do. To that end, we're running around doing what is not really in our purview, but we are beginning to work with other industries and other countries to try and resuscitate DINER. It is in our interest to see a vibrant defense industry. It is in our interest to lure back the skills that this country has lost because of lack of cohesiveness, and because it was not just lack of cohesiveness, enough input also into AMSCO and DINER to ensure. That has not excused AMSCO from not doing its job. They are slowly getting, they've gotten the whip so many times that I'm not too scared to scream. But we're beginning to get on track in making sure that we have identified those capabilities where we are the weakest. We are looking for partnerships. And we are very happy to say that there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest, especially where we are at our weakest. We are hoping that soon we'll be able to announce publicly, Chief SANDF, the partnership with Embraer of Brazil to manufacture and to repair in South Africa. It would be a boost to our defense industry. It will also enable us to force our own government to put more money in it. What we do want to say is that we want to quickly make sure that Chief Sandaf is able to come out with that rapid deployment capability, that we are able to deal with air transport, that we are able to have air capabilities in place, that our maritime platforms are fixed and work heavy, that the health systems are in place, and that we find the money which we are promised to ensure that even if we do not fill the 15 companies on the borders, we have enough technology to substitute. Because we think the porousness of our borders leads us into being, frankly, being undermined as a sovereign state, being undermined economically, and contributes to the unstableness of our economy. Because if you see your rail tracks jumping fence, if you see your electricity pylons jumping fence, you do know that you have issues. But before you point a neighbor at the face, you fix your own yard, you clean up. We are also looking at exploiting better, but also going back to forcing government to invest in IP. That R&D investment will stand us in good stead. It will promote young people to have more interest in the defense. It will resuscitate the relationship between DINEL, CSIR, and ourselves. But it will also begin to re-image the defense force and this country into the levels that we want to. Chairperson, I want to say with that, not finishing my speech, that I want to commit vote 26 and 23 to you and to this House for your approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The next speaker is the Honorable Kaba.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson, Minister, and Deputy Minister, honorable members, the Acting Secretary for Defense, Dr. Gamede, the Chief of the South African Defense Force, the Chief of Staff. I also see the Acting HOD for the Department of Military Veterans. Good morning. Parliament's two defense committees, the Portfolio Committee on Defense and Military Veterans and the Joint Standing Committee on Defense, have shown their resolve during the 6th Parliament to engage robustly on defense matters. For example, over the last year, the two defense committees jointly conducted 54 oversight meetings and undertook 3 oversight visits. The latter included visits to the Bloemfontein military area, Eastern Cape military units, and an inspection of the DINEL facilities responsible for aircraft maintenance. These visits are of specific value as they provide members with a first-hand experience of the factors that impact on members of the South African Defence Force. The Joint Standing Committee on Defence recently tabled its midterm review report to Parliament to update Parliament on the state of readiness of the South African Defence South African National Defence Force. The report highlights the massive strides made by the SANDF in terms of its deployment capabilities, despite fiscal constraints. It demonstrated the resolve of soldiers to deliver on their mandate, even under difficult circumstances. However, the report also warns that the committee is observing a critical state of decline of the SANDF, which is in urgent need of funding and recapacitation. In order to address this regression, Parliament's defense committees have made noteworthy interventions, especially through its budget review and recommendations reports. Through the committee's intervention, National Treasury has agreed to additional funding of 1.4 billion rand over the MTF to upgrade SA Navy frigates and submarines, as well as 1 billion rand in 2023-2024 to strengthen the country's airlift transport capability. Further, the committee noted the need for the SANDF to remain a technologically advanced force and advocated for the increased use of technology on South Africa's border as a force multiplier. National Treasury has agreed to additional funding of 500 million rand in 24-25 and 200 million rand in 25-26 to procure equipment and technology to aid the safeguarding of borders. Parliament will continue to monitor the responsible spending on this allocation over the MTF. A defense force is an important foreign policy tool in any nation, and South Africa is not different, specifically in the context of rising regional insecurity. The SANDF contributes to regional security through its participation in 2 external missions in the DRC and Mozambique. The recent loss of Sergeant Vusi Mabena, may his soul rest in peace, and the injury to one of his colleagues when their Oryx helicopter came under fire in the DRC highlights the sacrifice of South Africa's soldiers in the pursuit of regional stability. We owe a debt of gratitude to them. In 23-24, South Africa will maintain a total contingent of 957 members deployed in the DRC as part of the United Nations Stabilization Mission, as well as 1,495 members in Mozambique as part of the SADC peacekeeping mission. The defense committees have highlighted the need for deployed soldiers to be fully equipped and for investment to be made in the availability of helicopter and transport aircraft available in these missions. The SANDF also offers an important internal stability tool in support of the South African police to render frontline security services. On the internal front, the ongoing deployment of the SANDF along the South African borders to address cross-border crime has shown significant successes. In the second quarter of 22-23, for example, the SANDF confiscated 15 weapons, 484 vehicles, and 2,075 kg of contraband along South Africa's borders and prevented 3,730 undocumented persons and 66 stolen vehicles from illegal crossing into South Africa. As noted above, the SANDF has also assisted the police on various occasions through Operation Prosper, most recently as part of a deployment of 880 soldiers to guard critical infrastructure at ESCOM. Similarly, the Military Health Services was called in to assist the Department of Health to mitigate the effect of industrial action in March 2023. These are important contributors to domestic stability and security. Central to any effective military is its human resources component. And Parliament's defense committees have identified this as an area in need for further intervention. Firstly, previous cabinet decisions, and subsequent treasury regulations to pitch the DOD COE compensation of employees ceiling at the current level has become unimplementable, contributes to irregular expenditure, and impacts heavily on the country's defense capabilities. Over the last 5 years, the compensation of employees' expenditure averaged around 2.5 billion rand, bringing the total of irregular expenditure over the same period to over 12.5 billion rand. To fund this excessive expenditure, the department had to shift the funds from acquisition and maintenance budget. This has had dire effects on the serviceability of prime mission equipment, such as strategic airlift, vessels, and the deployment of vehicle fleets to meet the military operational requirements of the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army, respectively. Constraining the availability of key platforms is the lack of funds for mid-life upgrades, routine maintenance, and acquisition of spare parts. Therefore, the committee's budget report we're moving today expresses its concern to Cabinet in this regard and calls on the DOD and National Treasury to urgently find a feasible way forward in dealing with the matter of the COE. I should add that two committees of this Parliament, namely the Joint Standing Committee on Defense, as well as the Portfolio Committee on Defense and Military Veterans, have taken an unprecedented step, that is to write to the President as a Commander-in-Chief to bring to his attention the serious situation that the SNDF is facing. The committee also notes the need for human resource interventions to ensure a younger, more agile and fit for purpose SNDF. To this extent, the budget report states that the DOD should prioritize the development and implementation of its human resources rejuvenation strategy to ensure an overall younger force that allows for soldiers to be exited at different levels. This strategy will be essential to provide young patriotic South Africans the opportunity to enter into the military. The previous initiative in 2021 to shift 1,293 reserve force members to the correctional services is a positive example of how aging soldiers can be assisted with alternative career choices. The Joint Standing Committee on Defense will in June 2023 conduct an international study tour to gather further information on, amongst other things, international best practice on defense, human resource management, rejuvenation, and the compensation of employees' expenditure optimization. The committee welcomes the repositioning of the Simonstown Naval Dockyard. The critical assets will prove essential in reviving the country's ability to manufacture its own vessels. The entity will require a competent partner to deliver on the maintenance and mid-life upgrade of our vessels at the required speed. In the year under review, the SNDF hosted the multinational maritime exercises with Russia and China. This saw 350 SNDF members participating alongside their Russian and Chinese counterpart. This follows a successful multinational peace support operation and humanitarian relief exercise with the US Army. It has conducted exercises with France and Germany. To carry favor with their masters, the opposition parties selectively picked on the training with Russia and said that this is confirmation of South Africa's support of Russia in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Nothing
Honourable
could be
Member,
further from
your
the
time
truth.
is now expired.
Our relations are neither stronger or weaker. With that, we support the budget. Thank you so much.
The next speaker is the Honourable Marais.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chairperson, this is our last budget for the 6th Parliament, and I want to express my appreciation to our Defence Committees, chairpersons and staff for excellent work and support over this period. Our Defence Force should be an instrument bolstering our foreign relations and protecting our international trade and investment interests. This budget unfortunately decreased to an unsustainable 0.73% of GDP, or 51.1 billion from the adjusted 51.6 billion rand. Given the defence index of 12 to 15% in real terms, this budget does not allow the Defence Force to comply with its constitutional mandate. While the 2015 Defence Review and National Treasury require a spending framework of 40% on cost of employees, 20% on training and operations, and 20% on equipment, procurement and maintenance, again, 70% will be spent on cost of employees and only 30% for the rest. With the abuse of the Defence Force to make up for failing departments, more specifically SAPs, most of the 30% is absorbed by unfunded ad hoc deployments. Little remain for maintenance and replacement of our prime mission equipment. The complete serviceability of some of our most crucial prime mission equipment, which mirror the dire state of the Defence Force, include 2 of 11 Rooivalk attack helicopters, 6 of 39 Oryx transport helicopters, 0 of the 4 Lynx maritime helicopters, 1 of the 6 C-130 cargo aircraft, 2 of the 26 Gripens, 3 of the 11 Hawks, 2 of the 35 Pilatus, 0 of the 4 frigates, 0 of the 3 submarines, and 0 aircraft for maritime patrol reconnaissance, search and rescue. Our landward, air, and maritime prime mission equipment have not been maintained, and we have not invested in high-tech digital, cyber, and satellite technology capabilities. Operation Pakisa cannot be supported, and we will unlikely be able to conduct search and rescue operations in the Southern Seas. With the responsibility to patrol and protect our borders of 4,471 kilometer land, 7,700 kilometer air, 3,940 kilometer coastline, and our exclusive economic zone of 1.5 million square kilometers, it will be impossible to defend our country against attacks. We cannot provide logistical support to our soldiers in the DRC and Mozambique with 1 C-130, with a consequence we have to charter aircraft at hundreds of millions rand per year, enough to buy our own. We have witnessed at 6SAI that our airborne infantry units cannot prepare our soldiers for deployments due to the unavailability of Oryx and C-130s. Our landward forces find themselves in the same predicament, with Ops Corona under-resourced and our borders remaining porous. We urgently need political and management will to bring about changes, otherwise a complete collapse is imminent. I do believe, based on the current and future threats, but with the required restructuring of the Defence Force and deprioritization of its strategic focus and spending, that one, we are about 20 billion rand underfunded, and that secondly, we must aim towards 1% of GDP of budget over the medium term. Let's deal with the elephant in the room, the irrational Russian love affair. Over the last 30 years, government exploited the US and EU as our most important trade and investment partners, with significant trade and investment surpluses compared to the deficits with China and especially Russia. 4 incidents that took place that gives the impression of this Russian favoritism are: 1, munition imports and exports happens via official ports of entry. Authorization was granted to the Lady R, a Russian commercial vessel, to bypass commercial ports and abuse our naval base instead. Unrestricted access was seemingly allowed for offloading and reloading cargo during the midnight hours of 6 to 8 December, with little or no control and security on the naval precinct. This was a major national security breach. Who authorized this and why? Were the 2019 and 2020 import permits for the Russian ammunition still valid? Something was loaded onto the Lady R. Was it ammunition? If not, release the vessel's cargo manifest to confirm this. Minister, you and the President should know the facts and what transpired. If everything was above board, why not be transparent and go on record? The longer you stay silent, the more the damage to our international image, investments and trade interests, most notably AGOA, and our economic prosperity. Second one is exercise Mosey, with little value to us, provided a propaganda opportunity to the Russians as exploited by their news agency TASS. A Russian commercial cargo was allowed to use Air Force Base Waterkloof for supposedly diplomatic purposes, a privilege not available to other nations. Where is the cargo manifest? At a time when National Treasury Defense criticizes defense for spending 1.5 billion on travel, Chief of the Army was allowed to gallivant in Moscow. Again, TASS exploited it for propaganda purpose. Why the favoritism and the preferential treatment, especially in the light of Russia's aggression on the Ukraine soil? Why risk our economic future, trade and investment and jobs? Is it favors and sovereign sacrifices in return for donations to the ANC, reportedly from the Russian government and oligarchs? If so,
Honourable
is it
Member, your
treasonous
time is now
against South Africa?
expired.
There must be consequences. I thank you.
The next speaker is the Honourable Mafanya.
Thank you very much, Chair, Minister. Chairperson, 10 years ago, young and old, educated and poor, and not so poor, congregated at Uncle's Home Hall in Soweto to answer the question, what is to be done? These women and men resolved to establish the Economic Freedom Fighters as a political organization to contest for political power and whose ultimate aim is the destruction of exploitation of oppression and the ushering in of socialism. Minister, your predecessors came, stood here with grand wish list, and we find ourselves to where we are today. And we note that today you put us in your wish list that is grand and very convincing. But this year, as we celebrate 10 years of existence of the tool at the hands of African people, we call on all African people to vote and to contribute to the growth of the EFF to usher in economic freedom in our lifetime. Chairperson, the defense industry as a whole and the South African National Defense Force in particular are in perilous state. They're in perilous state in this country. The systematic and deliberate collapse of Denel and Armscor by the ANC government has had ripple effects on, they've got a ripple effects on the industry as a whole and on the economy. The past 3 years, the government has been unable to bring stability to Denel, and seemingly they are oblivious to the impact that the collapse of the NEL would have on the status of the South African Army itself. The defense intelligence capacity cannot fully support the SANDF with advance warning of military threats and instability in the country. This was demonstrated even as Mr. Ramaphosa deployed SANDF internally to deal with crime in the Cape Flats, and in the wake of the uprisings in KZN, soldiers were wandering about aimlessly, and we even saw them used to collect looted foodstuffs in KZN. They did this because they had no idea what to do. They had no defense intelligence. Various studies have shown that our forces are inadequately equipped with old technology and weaponry. They cannot engage in robust military exercises, and they will not sustain a long-term replacement of equipment utilized in foreign missions. The sovereignty of armaments is compromised, and the maintenance constraints of prime mission equipment is visually stagnant. The South African Air Force aircrafts are unserviceable, and there are no spares, and engineers resort to cannibalizing other aircrafts to repair some as to remain relevant. We do not have infantry fighting vehicles fleet. The ones that are in existence need serious upgrades. The ability of the country to fulfill its international obligations is at stake. And the Navy and the Air Force have cut down on military exercises due to unavailability of equipment and resources. The President and the Minister are obsessed in deploying SANDF.
Honorable member. There's a disturbance on the virtual platform. On previous occasions, I've indicated that those microphones must simply be muted. Can we implement that, please? Please proceed, honorable member.
The President and the Minister are obsessed in deploying SANDF for internal support to other government departments, as well as external conventional military support with no availability of resources. The 51.124 billion for this financial year is inadequate and will never be able to meet the needs for our armed forces to maintain sufficient defense readiness. Despite this, Mr. Ramaphosa has recently deployed SANDF to defend ESCOM power stations from this emerging threat from our people. He knows that his dismal failure as president, demonstrated by his electricity crisis, rising unemployment, the suffocation of those who work by unsustainable interest rate hikes, has uncontrollable crime levels, and the involvement of key institutions of the state in the commission of crime all have the potential to tear the country down. He resorts to military intimidation of citizens like all dictators do. Mr. Ramaphosa is not different from Nagangwa, his Zimbabwean counterpart. They are both lords who have no interest in the development of this country. Perhaps Mr. Lokota was right, that now that he is president, he has come to finish off the hopes of Black liberation that his masters wanted him to dash when they saved him from imprisonment in the 70s. We reject this budget. Thank you.
The next speaker is the Honorable Majosi.
Honorable I will take it for Honorable Majosi. Honorable Chairperson, it is important. It's beyond.
Honorable member, may I once again request the political parties to send us the name of the member. If the member is not physically present in the house, just inform us prior to you taking the virtual platform that this is the member that is going to speak. You may continue.
Honorable Chairperson, the importance of the capable defense of our country is beyond question. Defense is our last vestige and importance of our national stability in times of crisis. It is fair to play a peacekeeping role on the continent and safeguard our borders from ever-increasing threats of cross-border incidents by crime trafficking and syndicates. Hence, it is it is incumbent upon our government to prioritize national defense and ensure that all necessary funding and resources are available for our defense whenever and wherever they are needed. This unfortunately is not the case. And with the major budget this department received, it is no wonder that is remain at its lowest ebb of functionality. This has been knocked on effect of creating poor moral and ill discipline within the ranks of our soldiers, which translate into unnecessary incidents, and in some instances, deaths. Maintaining skilled and motivated workforce is crucial. There must be a great professionalism development programs, better salary package, and pension for our military veterans. We stand by and salute our brave military veterans who risk their lives in the struggle against the apartheid and serve in the various peacekeeping missions across Africa. Their sacrifice and commitment to the peace and security are the foundation upon which peace and security are built in this country. Although this budget has a potential to bring the significant positive change to the lives of our veterans by promising access to education and training for thousands of veterans, integrating them into the national workforce, and securing business opportunities for them, a lot still needs to be done. As we celebrate this potential progress, we must not turn a blind eye to the past failure of this government and how it neglected military veterans for so long. For 12 years ago, this government failed to fulfill its promises and obligation to provide pensions to military veterans, leaving them struggling financially. This negligence is not just an oversight, but deliberate failure to honor the military veterans. It mocked their sacrifice and raised serious questions about government's commitment to welfare of our veterans. The failure to provide pension for military veterans has undermined their financial security, making them face hardship and struggle that they didn't have the face of proper support and been provided to them. Needless to say, the mental toll of such neglect cannot be overstated. The families of our veterans have been suffered to. Children and spouses have borne and borne of financial strain and a negative impact on their welfare and education profound. Although the initiatives in the current budget come too late, particularly on socio-economic empowerment, the IFP believe that there's always a time to right a wrong. For this reason, we call upon the government to ensure that the swift and full implementation of this budget. We'll accept no more delays, no more excuse. Military veterans have waited long enough. Given the rampant corruption in this government, we demand robust mechanism of accountability and transparency in the administration of the veteran benefit to prevent any taking of chances for self-enrichment. In as much as the current budget proposes the creation of jobs in partnership with the private sector, we demand that partnership must not only bring jobs, but also cares for our military veterans so that they can contribute to the society and use their skills and experience for their economic advancements. In conclusion, the IFP affirm our unwavering commitment to our defense and military veterans. We'll continue to push for their welfare, honor their sacrifices, and ensure their contribution to our national are never forgotten. The IFP support this budget. I thank you, Chair.
The next speaker is the Honorable Dr. PJ Groenewald.
Geachte voorsitter, deur u tot die agbare minister. Honorable Minister, maybe we must just look a bit back to the history. In the 90s, we kicked off with a green paper on defense, the defense review, and all the needs for the South African National Defence Force. We had the arms procurement process. And then I think you will agree that since 2005, and I actually went back and looked at my speeches from then, in each and every debate, we complained about the lack of finances for the South African National Defence Force. And it is a valid argument to say that we need more money to ensure a functional and well operational South African National Defence Force. And I supported it all these years. But Honourable Minister, we must also admit that when we look at the arms procurement scandal, the taxpayers of South Africa, they are asking questions. Because if you want more money from the taxpayers say, well, do I get worth of my tax money? And unfortunately, we must be honest towards each other to say, no, you don't. Let's take the procurement, the arms procurement situation. How many of those armaments are really operational at this moment? Our submarines, our frigates, our fighter planes, all of it. With great respect. And it is sad to stand as a proud soldier to say, many went down the drain. They're not operational. And then you cannot blame the taxpayers of South Africa saying, we don't agree to give more money. I am worried when you just said that we will see that commanders must take responsibility. Why must we see to it? That is natural, that a commander must take full responsibility. Maar agbare minister, daar is, soos ons altyd in Afrikaans sê, daar is ook klein jakkalsies wat die wingerde verwoes. Ek het vir jou 'n vraag gevra. 'n Brigadier-generaal wat sedert 2017 op spesiale verlof is omdat daar kriminele klagtes teen haar is. 2017. In April maand hierdie jaar hardloop daar 'n kragopwekker by haar huis 24/7 in Centurion. Ek het vir jou 'n vraag gevra, jy het geantwoord. Dit is gestaak. Dit het die weermag R58.000 gekos van 1 April tot 20 April vir daardie brandstof en daardie kragopwekker. Dis die klein jakkalsies wat die publiek sien wat die wingerde verwoes. Honourable Chair, I want to come to the veterans of South Africa. You're a soldier, or you were a soldier, I'm a soldier, I was a soldier. We must have respect for our veterans. And you know, and you were part of the process when we wrote the Military Veterans Act. And it was a long discussion of who should be seen and defined as a military veteran. And it was about the statutory and the non-statutory forces and everything, right? And we agree. We said we honor all soldiers. Therefore, statutory forces are also part of the veterans. You know that there were regulations and we've asked some questions and it has been changed. And yes, it provides for a military veteran in terms of the definition. But now if you go on the website of the Military Veterans Association or Department, then it says there are certain limitations on the pensions for statutory forces. Now, Honourable Minister, that's unacceptable. I've asked a question, why? And what are these limitations? In Suid-Afrika moet ons veterane respekteer en almal moet op 'n gelyke basis kwalifiseer. Ek weet hulle moet 'n middele toets slaag, maar kom, ons gee minstens krediet aan alle militêre veterane. Ek dank u.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The next speaker is the Honourable Swart.
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, it was a great joy to attend the recent SA Air Force Museum Flying Dad Air Force Mobile Deployment Wing at Swartkoop, and I was immensely impressed with both the veteran and the younger pilots who took to the skies in a number of vintage and new aircraft, and it was particularly pleasing to once again see the Gripen and Hawk fighters in action. The ACDP would like to commend all members of the armed forces who planned and participated in this successful event. We also sadly remember SAF flight engineer Sergeant Vusi Mabena, who was killed in the DRC in February this year. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family and at the SAF at this time, and we wish the Commander, Major Matlapeng, a speedy recovery. Now, it is against this background that the ACDP once again laments the budgetary cuts experienced by the SANDF. The defense budget is shrinking in real terms, going from 54 billion in 2021 down to 54 billion again in 2023, and then 51 billion for this financial year. And clearly it is unsustainable. The ACDP has, like many other parties from the majority party through to opposition parties, lamented this decline. And it is sad that this has not been properly addressed, given the important role that the SANDF plays in protecting our constitutional democracy. However, at the same time, one has to also express concerns about the overspending, and this largely due to the cap on compensation with the exit mechanisms. And the ACDP is pleased that there is an engagement between the Defense Department, SANDF, and National Treasury in this regard, because clearly, as the committee has indicated, whilst on the one hand, there must be prudent financial spending, this must not result in a shrinking defense force, and that we all agree is what is occurring. National Treasury has made various recommendations on optimizing internal spending, such as staging Armed Forces Day once every 2 years, reconsidering the number of parades, re-evaluating continued maintenance of 44 attaché officers. Minister, this is an important issue. The attaché officers costing billions, and I think this is something that should be looked into. Chairperson, the ACDP also shares concerns about the docking of the sanctioned Lady R Russian cargo ship at Simonstown Naval Base. The question is, what was loaded on and off the ship during the midnight hours? If it was innocent, release the cargo manifest. Ongoing silence on this issue threatens very important trade relations with the West. To conclude, Chairperson, despite severe budgetary constraints, the SANDF has always responded when needed, both in peacekeeping functions and domestically. For that, the ACDP honors all the men and women in uniform. I thank you.
The next speaker is the Honorable Deputy Minister of Defence and Military Veterans.
Honorable House Chair, I wish I could live long enough to see the Sun City of the EFF, where there will be a chicken in every pot and a car in every garage. But on a serious note, Honorable Chair, the Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, honorable members of Parliament, and members of the oversight committees, government is not relenting in its endeavor to improve the plight of military veterans in South Africa. Last week, we were handing over 13 decent houses to military veterans in Midvaal, Savannah City settlement in the Sidibeng district, thanks to the Gauteng Department of Human Settlements for their consistency in honoring the service level agreement between the two departments. As a province, Gauteng is leading the delivery of houses to military veterans in all the 9 provinces. At 883 units delivered since the commencement of this program, the next closest province at 358 is the Eastern Cape. We wish to take this opportunity to commend the Gauteng Department of Human Settlements for this exemplary performance. With the interventions explored at the MINMAC of the Minister of Human Settlements 2 weeks ago, I'm confident that together with MECs of human settlements in the provinces, we'll overcome the many glitches around housing delivery to military veterans soon. Honorable members, when government veterans in 20 there would still be military veterans who are without houses for the simple reason that this is not a big community. Secondly, these are citizens of mature age and not getting younger either. As a result, many of them have perished waiting in the queues. According to the records, 4,253 applicants are approved for housing. Of this number, 2,083, which constitutes 49% or almost half of them, have received their houses. It is my considered view that with the available capacity of government in the provinces to deliver houses, these remaining applicants can be housed within a relatively short period of time if we can eliminate a number of subjective weaknesses around housing. We intend convening a housing indaba with military veterans associations to address these challenges, including the critical and urgent revision of the regulations governing housing. This will be with a view to arrive at a determination of a realistic but purposeful deadline within which this program, the provision of housing to military veterans, can and should be brought to an end. In our current annual performance plans, the target of houses to be delivered to military veterans is 480 units. Another significant achievement in the endeavor by government to restore the dignity of military veterans is the commencement of the rollout of the military veterans pension following the tabling of the regulations for 30 days in Parliament as communicated by the Honorable Minister of Defense and Military Veterans Minister Modise on the 22nd of December 2022. The Government Pensions Administration Agency deserves accolades for putting citizens first in their work. They made it possible against all odds for this pension to be rolled out by the 24th April 2023. They put in place all the requisite framework agreements with DMV. They established the standard operating procedures, established the business requirement specification, designed the admission configuration, opened the PMG account, created email addresses for applications and inquiries, and trained regional administrators for military veterans to access this relief. Honorable members, in settlements where we have succeeded to house military veterans in significant numbers, their outcry is about absence of incomes for livelihoods. The desire to place military veterans in jobs has not been successfully coordinated. This has been further compounded by the constrained state of our national economy and the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. It is for this reason that the breakthrough we've finally made to introduce the military veterans pension is a huge achievement, thanks to the political support by the PTT that the PTT brought to bear on this matter. Military veterans who are without pensions for the services rendered to our country will therefore be a thing of the past. They will now be modestly cushioned by this pension. In this regard, it has since come to light through the intervention by Honorable Bantu Olomisa that pensions of civil servants who were employed by the TBVC states, soldiers included, are mired in administrative complexities which have left some of them without pensions. The matter stands referred by the President to the Minister of Finance for prompt attention. The ministry will monitor progress in this regard and ensure that no military veteran is left behind without a pension. We intend to load 4,000 recipients of this pension by the end of this financial year, according to our plans. 330 million has been set aside for this purpose in this financial year. Honorable members, while still on pensions, we must clear the misunderstanding regarding the Military Pensions Act of 1976, General Groenewald, and the military veterans pension as introduced by DMV. In short, the two instruments are not the same and are not reconcilable. The 1976 military pension was not a pension in its object. It was a compensation policy for injuries incurred by soldiers during their years of service in SADF before 1994, which was paid in modest installments monthly to the end of the recipient's life. This included those who were serving their call-ups in accordance with the national service system under apartheid system. Pensions in SADF only accrued to members of the permanent force, the professional soldiers who were members of the regular force at the point of exiting the system. The above notwithstanding, there is a need, nevertheless, to harmonize the contemporary compensation for injuries as provided for in the Military Veterans Act, Act number 18 of 2011, and the 1976 Military Pension Act, which is also a compensation for injuries too. Honorable members of the House, the Department of Military Veterans derives its mandate from the Military Veterans Act of 2011, which requires it to provide national policy and standards on socio-economic support to military veterans as their dependents, including benefits and entitlements to help realize a dignified, unified, empowered, and self-sufficient community of military veterans. We are once again tabling the budget of DMV this year under the stewardship of an acting incumbent, the newly appointed acting DG of DMV, Vice Admiral retired Musiwa Hlongwane, who is fortunately not a stranger to this Oversight Committee of Parliament, as committee members have interacted with him in his previous responsibilities as Chief of the South African Navy. This development is politically most regrettable, but a necessary intervention by the ministry in observing the injunctions of our administrative law to protect public interests and to advance the strategic priorities of the sixth administration of our democratic government. Last year, when we presented our plans, we pointed out that we were optimistic about prospects of meaningful advances in our work. This was because there were and still are several critical subjective weaknesses which we could have overcome and will overcome. We must stick to the rule book in order to achieve a turnaround of DMV and to regain lost time in fixing the back end of the department in order to ratchet up the output of the front end of the department. We need to put in place reliable and capacitated internal audit controls. We need proper legal and labor services. We need an adequately staffed human resource branch. We need more planners. We need disciplined, conventional supply chain management. We need communicators, to mention some of the debilitating gaps we urgently need to attend to in order to achieve bigger successes. This high vacancy rate was further exacerbated by suspensions which were not expeditiously addressed. Lastly, the project to buttress the efficiency of the department's business operations through automation, which we reported about when we tabled our plans last year, is still work in progress with modest advances made. In other areas of the department, work has been proceeding apace. The department has now paid out more than 6 million for compensation for injuries and trauma. The department will ensure that the processing of the remaining applicants is fast-tracked by increasing the availability of doctors who are dedicated to provide this service with a view to finalize this program by the end of this financial year. The extension of health services to military veterans dependents has been endorsed by the Presidential Task Team. The implementation of this decision has not received sufficient administration attention. The planning session of DMV agreed to convene a special workshop with SAMS to explore modalities of delivering comprehensive health services to military veterans. Education support has scored significant improvements. However, there are still structural deficiencies such as the absence of collaboration protocols with Department of Basic Education in the provinces. The DMV Education Support Program has produced over 50 graduates in the last financial year alone, including 2 medical doctors and 5 law graduates. 126 million was spent in the previous year 2022-2023 in support of the education of children of military veterans. Honorable members, one more urgent task as I move towards conclusion. That a task which the acting DG will help us attend to expeditiously is the convening of the long overdue conference of the umbrella body of our Military Veterans Association, SANVA. SANVA is one of the important enablers we need to realize the many things we must do for military veterans and with military veterans. We must commit to accomplish this task by the end of the second quarter this year. DMV's 2023-2024 financial year budget has increased by 224.7 million from the previous year in nominal terms and in real terms by 27.3% after adjustments for inflation. The biggest increase in nominal terms was in Program 2 with an additional 171.8 million allocated. Program 3 also sees a major proportional increase of 69.6 million rands, which is 47.15 nominal increase. The compensation of employees remains stable and increases only marginally from 133.4 million in 2022-2023 to 134.4 million in 2023-2024. The biggest increase in the budget allocation is in terms of households, which increases from 214.1 million in 2022-2023 to 442.3 million in 2023-2024. In summary, the DMV budget for this financial year is 894.7 million, from 670 million in the previous financial year. It is expected to increase at an average annual rate of 16.5% to 1.1 billion in 2025-2026. This increase is mainly due to the allocation of additional funding amounting to 839 billion for rolling out 839 million for rolling out the pension benefit to military veterans and their dependents, as well as 11.3 million over the same period to cover cost of living adjustments. Honorable House Chair, I wish to take this opportunity to thank military veterans in all our provinces, many of whom have been patient with us, many of whom have displayed the hallmark of their profession, discipline, even under trying times. Their understanding is appreciated. As we move closer to the 30th anniversary of our Freedom Day a year from now, let us work together as a disciplined and purposeful army with the determination to help government restore our dignity and place a place of honor in our community. My word of appreciation goes to my Minister Modise, the chairpersons of both our oversight committees and their hardworking members, the acting Secretary for Defense and the Chief of the Defense Force, the acting DG of DMV, and the undeterred senior managers of the two departments and the ministry. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister. The next speaker is the Honorable Olamisa.
House Chair, Honorable Minister and Deputy Minister, as well as honorable members. The UDM supports the budget. There have been things happening in this country that are embarrassing for us, and our intelligence gathering forces seem to be none the wiser. The July mayhem of 2021 took place, and we seem to be none the wiser as to who the perpetrators of that violence were. On a daily basis, there is vandalism of our railway and electricity infrastructure. as well as cash in transit heists and car hijackings. People from outside our borders have access to military-grade weapons, as was recently seen in Gqeberha, where taxis were pursued with guns, and in Potchefstroom, where a man was arrested in possession of 14 hand grenades. There is a low-intensity war inside our borders that is creating anxiety among South Africans. Intelligence gathering to protect our territorial integrity is becoming more and more important. The Defence Force must form part of developing a proactive plan for submission to the powers that be to curb these elements in our society. Moreover, the Defence Force has a greater role to play during disaster relief. With the unavoidable effects of climate change upon us, there should be greater preparedness and readiness to act when disaster strikes. Military bases and personnel across the country should be trained and be equipped to assist their civil counterparts, as they are always tardy in their response to a crisis. Finally, it is unlikely that we should see conventional war that would require military action, but we should use our resources to the fullest and most important in terms of the mandate of the SANDF, ensure the territorial integrity of this country during peaceful time too. Ngiyabonga. Enkosi.
Re a leboga se bui sa rena se se latelang, Honorable Shaky Ma'am.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. Allow me to thank the department for the presentation. The National Freedom Party will certainly support this budget vote tabled here today. Now, my concern is this, that the Defence Force is now expected to protect our other government institutions like ESCOM. Then how is it possible for the Defence Force to protect our borders if they are going to be deployed to protect all our power stations and other government buildings? Now, in order to achieve that, I think it's obvious that this department must get more budget. With limited budget, you certainly can't achieve this. But having said that, Chairperson, the National Freedom Party, like I said, will support this. We are cognizant of the fact that this department is facing lots of challenges, particularly with military equipment, vehicles lying in garages for a long period of time, not being able to get spares and hold arms and ammunition, which has to be shared. And that is why we believe more budget if you want the goods to be delivered. But let us also draw the attention of this House to Minister. We have South Africans training in Israel in the military, which poses a serious risk to South Africa. It's something that we need to address, not forgetting that the Israeli army brutally murdered Shireen Abu Akleh, a woman, a journalist, a Palestinian-American journalist who had a vest which clearly shows she's from the press. Despite that, she was murdered. I want to also, raise a concern. I see some colleagues of mine are talking about particularly Russia, and I like this topic, actually, I must tell you. But what I can't understand is what is good enough for the goose should be good enough for the gander. Yeah, it is the United States of America that is supplying Ukraine with war arsenal, military equipment, financial support, and cause chaos and mayhem all over the country, even supplying particularly military equipment. That is why their turnover increased 7 times last year, 7 times more. And yet nobody says anything about it. So South Africa must be dictated to and said, no, we must not supply. But having said that, But having said that, Minister, one of the issues that has come up, Denel, is the pride and joy of South Africa. I want to urge this department to do everything to make sure that Denel is successful. There's a concern that was raised with me was about beards for the Muslim community. I'd like you to look into that if we can actually address that. And very importantly, I think I wanted to draw an attention to one very important family. Yes, families are being shot down all over the world, my brother. All over. Children are dying. I got some statistics. 3,000 children were murdered in Israel, in Palestine, because of the arms and ammunition provided by the United States government. So let us do what is best for this country. Let not others dictate to us and tell us what we must do. Let's go ahead and do what it is.
Your time is
Some
up,
people will
Honorable
do anything
Shaggy,
to
ma'am.
please the West. Let us please ourselves. The National Freedom Party will support us. Thank you very much.
Sibuisa Silatelang is Honorable Shelembe. 4 minutes.
Chairperson, the dismal failure by the Department of the Military Veterans to submit its annual performance plan to Parliament as required and within the required timeframes is proof evidence that the ANC should not be trusted by voters and should be removed from power in 2024 general elections. The reduction in allocation to management, specifically financial management, from 18 million to 14 million is of great concern, given the findings by the Auditor General that during the previous year, audit material misstatements were identified due to inaccurate and incomplete supporting schedules and reporting. In 2021-22 financial year, the DMV made use of consultants to assist with preparation of the annual financial statement for a period of 2 years. And despite the use of this consultant, there were still material misstatements that needed to be adjusted. Hence, we say this reduction is of great concern. The DA welcomes the additional funding allocated for the rolling out of pension benefits to the military veterans, but it's very worrying that the DMV will not be able to spend this budget in full in this financial year, given that pension benefits regulations are yet to be finalized. The ANC government has since 2011 been failing to finalize their regulations, and this is why military veterans and their dependents are starving. The constant delay with the finalization of regulation cannot be tolerated. Chairperson, if the DA was in government, military veterans, their dependents would have their benefits delivered on time, and their dignity after serving their country with dedication would be preserved. Chairperson, the Military Veterans Act clearly defines the responsibility of the government in administering the affairs of the military veterans and benefits available to them. But military veterans are still not able to access health facilities due to the failure by the DMV under the ANC government to finalize the transport strategy. It is more than 11 years since the act was enacted, but military veterans are still suffering the consequences of the failing ANC government. Chairperson, by the end of 2022-23 financial year, the DMV had only spent about 10% of its allocation funding available for housing, resulting in only 68 houses being built against a target of 355. This is unacceptable. Military veterans are homeless because the DMV under the ANC government failed to spend the budget. Minister, the further reduction in allocation for provincial offices from 56.1 million to 45.6 million is another area of concern. Our oversight visit to East London in the Eastern Cape, we were disappointed that we are not able to get information due to understaffing. It became clear why military veterans, after traveling long distances to these offices, are failing to get assistance and information they need. During our oversight visit to Charity 491 Housing Project in Port Elizabeth, military veterans complained that due to unemployment, it is difficult to get to offices in East London because the DMV is yet to finalize the transport strategy. Minister, this is treating military veterans with contempt. Military veterans and their dependents are suffering the consequences of a failure by your department. Hulumeni kaKhongolose, ninesono aninamahloni okulambisa abantu bebanvikela kangaka belelwa izwe. Anginizondi nginitshela iqiniso anginisukeli. Balambile abafelokazi ngenxa yenu. Ngiyabonga.
Thank you very much, Honorable Peche. You've got 10 minutes.
Honorable co-chairs of the Portfolio Committee on Defense and Military Veterans, Honorable Minister of Defense, Honorable Deputy Minister, honorable members. Honorable Chair of the session, allow me to start by echoing the remarks by George S. Patton, Jr. and American General and Achieved Soldier, who said, open quote, "The soldier is the army. No army is better than soldiers. The soldier is also a citizen. In fact, the highest obligation and privilege of citizenship is that of bearing arms for one's country," close quote. As ANC, as we support this budget vote, as the African National Congress, I would like to salute the men and women who are in uniform, who give their lives and dedicate themselves to serving our nation within the South African National Defense Forces. Let me extend this gratitude to our fallen soldiers and ex-combatants who defend the South African flag and its people until the very end. Our defense forces have been doing well in executing their mandate. More work needs to be done to address the borderless challenges that are posed and can compromise our state security and sovereignty. We must take into consideration the changing landscape of information warfare and an increase in cybercrimes. That is why the important role played by the domestic defense industry must be recognized for their contribution to technology advancement. With the current budget constraints, we need to ensure we encourage all those who work in the Department of Defense and military veterans to guard against a waste of the minimal resources that are allocated to the department. We must reaffirm our zero tolerance approach to crime and corruption. The department has notably acted against some of those accused of wrongdoing. We appeal to those responsible for urgently speed up the investigations of irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure and enhance consequence management in this regard. In the same breath, the department is encouraged to urgently fill up the vacancies that exist. That must also urgently fill up the permanent appointments in the position of the Secretary of Defense and the DoD Chief Financial Officer. As South Africa chairs BRICS currently, we must showcase of our ability to be competitive on the global scale. Most of the times people would want to showcase our arts and culture, trade and industry, our governance and economy abilities. I am of the firm view that part of these things we must pride ourselves is our defense force, as our defense force. To have a world-class competing defense force. This means we must look deeply into the funding of the DoDMV. We cannot continuously have declining budget allocations while we expect improved outcomes from the same defense force that we need to do there, give us good output. In our work as the Portfolio Committee, we observe that there is a stagnant and lack of investment in the South African National Defense Force, mainly the landward defense capability and notably the South African Army infantry capability. We agreed that this factor has been worsened by the non-finalization of project of Esther. We recommend engagements between the National Treasury, the Department of Defense Force, and AMSCO to consider further funding for phase 2 of the project, depending on feasibility. We must also consider the upgrading of the current retail fleet to extend its serviceability as an immediate alternative. The National Treasury, the Department of Defense Force and AMSCO should jointly come up with a plan to address the infantry capability constraints. Honorable Chair of the session, we would like to caution against misalignments between the requirements set in the estimates of national expenditure and more realistic requirements in the APP. The department must ensure that it achieves the targets it sets for itself in the APP, which are achievable plans with the current physical context performance should be non-negotiable. There is a need to finalize the review of the 2015 Defense Review in this financial year, because the review provides a long-term defense policy and defense strategic trajectory to be pursued by the country over the next 4 medium-term strategic framework periods. It will give us a clear perspective of where we are headed to. This budget allocation must act as an indication of the commitment to make progress on the review of the 2015 Defense Review. During the State of the Nation address, the President of the country, His Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa said, open quote, "Let us get to work, let us rebuild our country, and let us leave no one behind," close quote. We observe that in most of the time, there are those who are pointing one finger and forgetting that most of the fingers are pointing somewhere. Having done that, perhaps while they are still looking for the mathematics as to how many fingers point somewhere, they should also refrain from the practice of making a lot of noise, because the lot of noise makes and disturb the society to understand where we are going as a nation. But they rather join hands and take to the quote by the president that we must work together for this country without the lot of noise that we are having and showing in most of the time. Chairperson, in concluding, we support this budget vote because we believe the Department of Defense and military veterans has an important and strategic role to play in getting to work to rebuild the country through its effective and efficiency. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Pehle. Jafta.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. The National Defense Portfolio is the anchor sheet of our national security and sovereignty. It is these anchor pillars from which this budget must be grounded. Alleviating the plight of military veterans must also be reflected in the budget. We must put it on record before this House that we support any efforts by the ministry to achieve peace in the region. But we must be clear that peace begins at home, and the work of the SANDF in our crime-ridden communities must be felt by our people. The funding of military intelligence must be beefed up, and this must be geared towards countering counter-terrorism acts. Honorable members, the coordination of our national responses through this National Security Council has not yielded the expected results. The July unrest, for instance, bears testimony to the uncoordinated work between the South African Defence Force, the South African Police Service, and the National Intelligence. While we do not support the reduction of funding of the South African Defence Force, we must record the ministry has not proven on a balance of probabilities. Why it needs further funding. This is because military veterans have always lived in perpetual poverty, whether under reduced or increased budget allocation. The staff of SANDF still live in derelict SANDF apartments, whether under a reduced or an increased budget allocation. Any tinkering with the SANDF budget will therefore be of no consequence. There is no doubt that peace and national security is central to development. It is in this regard that we cannot underestimate the constitutional role of SNDF in our democracy. This does not mean, however, that we must pay lip service to department's gradual decline, as demonstrated by the demise of Denel. This SNDF border capacity is in shambles, and many foreign nationals enter our ports of entry with little difficulty. This has led to social dislocation of our own country. The old and derelict military equipment is of great concern to us. There is therefore a need to modernize the defense and maritime fleets. On this narrow ground, we could be amenable to support this vote on the basis that an investment in military equipment is an investment in peace, development, and security. We will therefore support this budget with minor qualification. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Jafta. Cope. Honorable Nyonso. You've got 3 minutes, Honorable Member.
Plus COPE, 3 minutes. I will also speak on behalf of COPE. Honorable Chair, Comrade Kaba, ufana binoculars. It would be disingenuous of me if I reject this budget, because our constituency is benefiting from this budget. But, Comrade Minister, PAC wishes to express its disappointment in the negative attitude of the Eastern Cape Provincial Legislature and its Premier regarding the late Kamdeni, a leader of the Polko insurrection in the then Queenstown in 1962, as not worthy of an official funeral. That is not a problem, but the problem was when the Premier called the daughter and told her that there was nothing special about his father. It clearly says that patriotic heroes of the national liberation struggle who served in the cause of freedom and land rights are, for the Eastern Cape Premier, not worth remembering and commemorating. This betrayal is unacceptable. Kamdeni was 83-year-old military veterans, recognized and registered on the database of the Department of Military Veterans. He was an ex-political prisoner on Robben Island maximum prison and spent 20 years clean for his activities as cadre of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. He did not have criminal record, yet the Eastern Cape Premier refuses to acknowledge the fact that Kamdeni inspired younger generations to take up arms and smash apartheid and settler regime, which eventually led to the phase of history we have today in South Africa. The Eastern Cape Premier is stepping with his dirty boots on the graves of our patriotic heroes. Our history is written with blood, and no lies written in ink can erase it. The DMV is doing the same thing when they lock out many freedom fighters, but accept SADF black cleaners, gardeners, and askaris, the status of military veterans with forged SADF force numbers. The Liberation War veterans are completely rejected by the red tapes of the Department of Defense and military veterans. Minister, we are all concerned about these defense budget cuts. And Minister, please honor veterans, respect soldiers. PAC supports this budget.
Honorable members, I have received a request from Honorable Hendricks, so I will use my discretion to give him 3 minutes. Over to you, Honorable Hendricks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. There is no excuse for that thousands of military veterans continue to live in abject poverty. I was a child soldier at the age of 11, and I led the first vocal march in Rochester Road in District 6. So I'm very passionate about military veterans. When I got the award as a pioneer of the internet, and I opened an internet cafe for them in Canal Walk. Honorable House Chair, we heard the Deputy Minister say tension is building up within the military community. Government must restore the dignity of our military veterans, roll out pension payouts. In December 2002, the veterans were promised by the former Deputy President and the Minister that the budget has been set aside to pay pensions before Christmas. But 6 months later, no pensions were paid to any of them. And the question is, where is that money? There's another Christmas coming up in June in the Muslim community. Maybe it will be paid before La Barang. Please let us not make promises to them, but see that their needs are dutifully addressed. Military veterans must be given their fair share. They should be given land so they can produce and create generational wealth. I presented a petition on behalf of 500 sailors in Simonstown. There is enough land. Land has been identified, but this process is dragging for 3 years. Military veterans can't afford land in Simonstown. So if they give the land free, then the cost of the houses will be reduced. At the presidential imbizo in Drakenstein on Friday, the 19th of May, Minister Squatsa spoke about the chicken farm managed by military veterans in the Cape Islands. In this regard, none of them have the foggiest idea where this farm is. Anyway, it's important that substantial training be provided for those engaged in farming and cooperatives. Maybe President Ramaphosa must declare chickens as one of the 1,000 products that can only be marketed and sold by small businesses and hopefully military veterans.
Honorable Hendricks, just hold on a bit. There's one member here who is standing up. What's the problem, Honorable Member?
Sorry, Chairperson. On Rule 53, it's very clear on the speakers list. If you have a look, it says in a mini plenary session, does not make of a speakers list, except in the event of a debate on a budget vote, when a speakers list must be used. It doesn't say may be used. So, Chairperson, I think it's out of order for the speaker to bring in another party which is not on the speaker list. It says it must be used. So there is no that you can use your interpretation on it, Chair. So please, I don't see Aljamar on this speakers list, Chair, and it says it must be used. So if I can just bring that forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. I am not using my interpretation. I said I'm using my discretion. So there's a difference between the two. So I will return on the exact ruling regarding that particular interpretation of that clause to you. Just complete what you are saying, Honorable Hendricks.
Yeah, he's disturbed me. That's how they disturb democracy in South Africa. If the DA government and the other opposition governments from apartheid takes over a government, they will double the pensions and benefits of state-era apartheid operatives. But our military veterans must stand in a queue and wait for their pensions. The interjection is disgusting. Thank you very much, Honorable House Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Hendricks. Our next speaker is Honorable Bond. 3 minutes. And just before you proceed, Honorable Bond, I have received a note that this is your maiden speech. Over to you.
Thank you, House Chair. Just like to note the Honourable Chairperson of the Defence Committee and the members of the Defence Committee, the Minister of Defence and his deputy, the honourable members of this House, all senior members of staff of the Department of Defence and the Department of Military Veterans. In addition to what is raised prior by the Honourable Marais and the Honourable Shalembe, who I totally concur with. After my being elected to this esteemed establishment, it was a rude awakening for me to find out and learn and understand that the Department of Defence is in an absolute mess. This department is riddled with corruption and bad administration. The disposition of the entities of Armscor and Denel truly leave little to be desired. Logistical support of military is hampered by non-supply of essential necessities to ensure that the quality for a well-equipped and up-to-date military is done. Equipment which is out of date and still in use continues to be unmaintained. A properly secure supply will ensure an effective operation of the military in protecting this country. The non-compliance of the age limitations for posts of our military members is affecting the ability to be effective. Military needs to upgrade and to stay relevant to properly protect and serve our soldiers who will in turn protect this country. This country's military is not combat ready to secure this country. What concerns me about the Lady R, who arrived like a lady in the night and disappeared as quickly as she had arrived. But what is not being raised is the incidence of the docking of ships involved in the BRICS naval exercises, which include China and Russia, that were loaded with I don't know what, and I don't think anybody else does either. Having served in the military for many years, we have adopted the code of conduct for all uniformed members of South Africa. I still carry this with me. That includes the rules of war. Notwithstanding these principles of engagement, the one thing that stands out is paragraphs 2 and 3 of the rules of war. I will fight only enemy combatants and attack only military objectives. I will employ methods of attack to achieve the military objectives with the least amount of harm to civilian and property. As far as the Military Veterans Department is concerned, this department is in a worse state than the Department of Defense. Not filling critical posts, little or no service delivery, riddled with corruption, no value for money. The money that is budgeted for the Veterans Department, for the number of veterans registered, cannot be justified. The military veterans should be respected for their service by the department and the country they serve.
Honorable member, your time is up.
Thank you, Chairperson.
Yes, and you know what I did? Because this is for the first time you make your speech here. I gave you 1 free extra minute.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. I was using my discretion. Thank you very much. Honorable Mutle. You've got 11 minutes, but earlier on when Honorable Petla was speaking, she saved 2 minutes, 20 seconds. So it's up to you to decide what you do with that extra 2 minutes, 20 seconds. Over to you, Honorable Mutle.
Thank you, including your discretion, Chair. Revolutionary greetings to the real Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, President Cyril Ramaphosa in absentia, the Minister of Defense and Military Veteran, the Deputy Minister, the Chair of the Portfolio Committee, the Chief of the South African National Defense Force, Acting SecDef, as well as the Acting Director General of the Department of Military Veteran and fellow South Africans. The African National Congress welcome and support the budget vote 23 and 26. However, we wish to state that the condition under which our National Defense Force is operating have reached a level where all of us must be concerned. And I'm happy some of the opposition parties have raised that concern. It means we are in consensus with the budgetary constraints that continue to make it difficult for the South African National Defence Force to perform optimally. It is on that note, Chair, that we think a fundamental question that was once asked by the former minister, who's currently the Speaker of Parliament, is still relevant when she asked, I quote, open quote, what kind of a defense force should South Africa have and what can it afford, close quote. As we pass this budget today, it is clear that question remains unanswered. I'm very disappointed, Honorable Murray, that as the DA, you seem to be obsessed with Lady R. And it's a sign of desperation. You know that some operations of the Defense Force are classified. Why should you expect them to divulge those classified information to the public? You want them to release the cargo manifesto that you know very well that is classified. The USA has sent you to advance on their behalf and we dismissed you in the portfolio committee. Now, they couldn't wait any longer. They couldn't wait any longer, but they were not happy with your slowness and they had to come out. And you know, I want to put how Khalid Abdul Mohammed characterized people like Honorable Shalembe when he said, and I quote, when white folks can't defeat you, they will find some Negro, some boot-licking, butt-licking, butt-dancing, bamboozed, half-baked, half-fried, homogenized nigger that they can throw out in front of you, close quote. We are unapologetic about the deployment of SANDF to ensure that the right of South African is protected. That must be noted by the EFF. Therefore, your planned shutdown was not successful and you must disabuse yourself from imagining that you can take power through the back door. We are disappointed that you rejected this budget and in the portfolio committee, you continue to tell us that your approach to matters of defense are non-partisan. We expected nothing from you in any event because you always display what Frantz Fanon says about the suffering from cognitive dissonance. That's what clearly describe what the EFF stands for. Honorable Chair, Section 200, subsection 2 of the Constitution knows that the primary objective of the Defense Force is to defend and protect the Republic. However, the National Defense Force also has an internal role, as is evidenced in the Constitution, which allows for the deployment of the National Defense Force in support of the South African Police Service, and Section 18 of the Defense Act, number 42 of 2002, that allows for the deployment of the National Defense Force in support of any state department to ensure essential services and to preserve life, health, and property. The South African National Defense Force can therefore be considered an important insurance policy for internal stability in our country. Example of this deployment ranging from 2018 to 2019 is a deployment of engineer to address the pollution of the Vaal River. 2019 deployment with the South African Police Service to combat crime in the Western Cape. Several large-scale deployments in 2020 and 2021 as part of the effort to combat COVID-19 pandemic. Large scale of deployments in 2021 to Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal in response to widespread civil unrest. 2022 deployment to KwaZulu-Natal following the flooding in that province. March 2023, deployments to assist the Department of Health at various hospitals to mitigate the impact of industrial action. As we are seated here, we anticipate another deployment to go and assist in the capping of the cholera outbreak in Hammanskraal, where the DA preside and give our people dirty waters that result in that outbreak. The current deployment of the National Defence Force to Eskom Power Station to secure critical infrastructure. The above deployments were in addition to the National Defence Force standing deployment of 15 subunits for the purpose of border safeguarding of South Africa's land borders. However, it must be noted that the continued high level of the South African National Defence Force internal deployment is not without risk. The National Defence Force may not be fully suited, trained, funded, and equipped for this internal deployment. Increased deployments of the South African National Defence Force under this condition place significant strain on the force to maintain high level of defense readiness. It is also impacting negatively on training schedules and the DoD budget. In essence, a shrinking defense force with a shrinking budget is consistently required to conduct additional internal deployments to support other departments, which is unsustainable. We must ensure that appropriate staffing, funding, training, and equipping of the South African National Defence Force is made available for them to fulfill these additional functions. In simple terms, it is expected from government to pay its insurance at all material times to give effect to constitutional imperative as it relates to the mandate of the South African National Defence Force. Honorable Chair, the South African National Defence Force is a multifaceted military force that houses a number of specific skills. One of this, the engineering formation, one of this is the South African Army Engineering Formation. The engineering formation specializing in, amongst others, installation of bridges and other bridge systems, given the need to improve the lives of South Africans, specifically in terms of the access to rural areas. The National Defence Force has been committed to construct bridges in selected rural areas under the Well-Sizwe Rural Bridge Program. Pedestrian and vehicle bridges have previously been constructed to assist communities in the Eastern Cape. About 5 bridges were built, and in KwaZulu-Natal, 14 bridges were built. In his 2023 State of the Nation address, President Ramaphosa committed to expand the Well-Sizwe Rural Bridges Program to deliver 95 rural bridges in this financial year. The project again shows high level of interdepartmental cooperation between the DoD and the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. Honorable Chair, 2015 Defense Review note that the persistent disconnect between the defense mandate, South Africa's growing defense commitments, and the resource allocation has eroded defense capabilities to a point where the Defence Force is unable to fully fulfill its constitutional responsibility to defend and protect South Africa and its people. At the time of its publication, the Defense Review noted, in order to implement milestone 1 of the review, focusing on arresting the decline of the force, a consistent allocation of at least 1.1% of the country's GDP defense will have been made. To move to milestone 2, an allocation of at least 1.6% of the GDP will be required. However, since 2015, the DoD budget has continued to decline from 0.95% of the GDP in 2018-2019 to only 0.73% of the GDP in the current financial year. The figures above are in-shrunk contracts to the other military forces around the world and the continent. For an example, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, encourages its member states to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Although not all NATO members achieve this target, it is indicative of the need for the elevated defense spending closer to home. Very few African states spend less than 1% of its GDP on defense. For example, by 2020, Angola spent 1.6% of its GDP on defense, Algeria 6.7%, Botswana 3.5%, Kenya 1.1%, Egypt 2.9%, Tanzania 1%, and Rwanda, which is the smallest, 1.4%. We can't continue in this trajectory. In addition to the shrinking, as I conclude, defense allocation, the actual size of the South African National Defense Force has also declined in terms of the number of personnel as a result of a cabinet decision. By 2015, the South African National Defense Force has a total personnel contingent of 78,011 against an estimated population of 54.96 million. By 2023, this decreased to an SANDF personnel contingent of 69,072 against an estimated of population of 60.6 million. We are 8,939 less personnel compared to 2015. Other militaries in the area maintain comparatively much large forces, such as Angola, 117,000 soldiers with population of 35 million. Algeria, 317 soldiers with population of 46 million. Egypt, 836 soldiers with a population of 107 million. Nigeria, 223 soldiers with a population of 220 million. And Rwanda, which is the smallest, 35,000 soldiers with a population of 13 million. It must be kept in mind that 1996 white paper on defense stated that the South African National Defense Force shall be a balanced, modern, affordable, and technologically advanced military force. It is therefore essential to find the right balance between these force sizes and the provision of the modern military technology in the context of a country threat perception. However, both these aspects require appreciation of funding, which is not achieved through the current level. I thank you, Honorable Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mutle. Honorable Minister, ke nako ya gago jaanong go ritella. Yaanong motlotlegi Minister, mo mošong a no o simolola fa, go na le metsotswana e le mebedi o ne wa ipeela yone. Ke ne ke re o itse fela gore e teng fao.
Ini hitile bobedi ngwana kgosi ene le na le di second tse 50 ga marao ja tse 50 ke a dumela. Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, I have been an MP for so long that I will not even try to respond to Honorable Bond. Clearly, he is still has to adjust and get to understand that we don't play football with defense. We disagree a lot amongst us as parties, but we don't get that dirty. So I'll leave it at that. Now, I want to unreservedly, Honorable Nyanso, to apologize. To apologize unreservedly for the remarks that you say were made towards a POCO member, a former Robben Islander, a veteran. I would take strong exception if anybody said that about any member of the ANC, any member of Umkhonto weSizwe, any member of Kipling. So our apologies. We will find a way of meeting up with the family and apologize. Honorable Mare, I agreed with almost everything you said today, except that, and I want your permission, Chair, to use the word focal. Because in my hometown, you know, focal means nothing. I will reiterate what I said. We put focal on that ship, nothing. Now.
Chairperson, on a point of order, can you declare with your discretion?
Yes, I have
whether
not
you,
yet.
whether
I've-
you are tolerating the use of the word focal?
Yes,
in
but you
Parliament,
know,
whether in fact it is
There's nothing
parliamentary.
wrong with focal.
you know what is,
There's nothing wrong with word focal.
you know what is your problem, honorable member? You stand up, you mention chairperson, and you just proceed, right? As if the chairperson doesn't exist, right? So it doesn't work like that in the house. You stand up, you ask to be recognized. Then the chair will give you recognition and thereafter give you an opportunity to speak, right? So you proceeded without getting permission from the chair. So I'm going to request you to restart what your point of order.
Chairperson, on a point of order.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. Chairperson, could you rule whether the use of the word focal is parliamentary in this house? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you on that, member, honorable member. Proceed, honorable minister.
Chairperson, I will not, I think it was a deliberate try to drain. The honorable member, Honorable Grunewald will tell you 1994 when you walk in here, I was in the first rules committee of the South. I've been a presiding officer longer than anybody I know in this country. And I think I do understand the rules of the National Assembly. And if you want to do that, then the chair will come back to you as to. I deliberately asked to be allowed to use the word focal because it means nothing in South Africa, and you know that. Because precisely because you are sitting there and you are always the aura. Honorable Mare, I agree with almost everything you said. You and I disagree on one thing. The insistence that your relationship with Israel, nobody can talk against, but the relationship of the ANC with Russia, which far outdates us coming into this house, must be tempered with. The relationship which is between the Russian army and the South African army predates my coming into this, predates the relationship and the ordering of whatever it was that was on that ship that was delivered, and the Lady R spectacle. Now, maybe we must be advised whether we must jettison every relationship that we have. And maybe you must also tell us, honorable members, whether the 14 members of the Defense Secretariat and military who are on their way in the next few weeks to the US must be stopped, because then you are going to tell us we are also sucking up to the US. Because you see, we handled relations on a country by country, on a defense to defense. And therefore, I think it would be very myopic of us to be every time to be told you cannot breathe until we tell you so, because that will stifle any interaction. You ridicule the Musi. By the way, Musi was the name given by the South Africans. Musi 1, Musi 2. Musi was an exercise that we said actually enabled us and our Navy. And just as all of us here have reiterated that our Navy is on its stomach, it's not floating, because it enabled us to enable members of the Navy to have exercises on those ships. Now, I welcomed the president's calling for an inquiry into the matter of Lady R. I think I would still be able to say I will reiterate what I said, that Defense Force, if it has lied to me that something was put in, it will be a matter. All the documentation from the time the order was made in 2018 up to the time the offloading, all the documentation of SARS will be made available to that inquiry so that we can please be allowed to think and proceed with other business of defense. I think that Honorable Honorable Groenewald, I've heard the complaint about the pensions, the statutory versus non-statutory. What we are grappling with is not recognizing statutory forces. What we are grappling with is actually for me to dig out the information around the types of contracts. For instance, people who were not actually volunteers, who were enlisted, who would serve a 2-year and others would run away. What was it called? Conscripted. Because when you look, and for me, the biggest headache that we must solve, because it is important for the corps, the colored corps, is for us to get into those contracts, see how long they were in the Defense Force and give them what is right by them. But I do not want to go back to the constituency with half-baked stories. So I want to say that we'll do the best that we can for the military veterans, but we will not be ostentatious. When you look at these amounts that we're giving, it is because maybe dilapidated and non-functional as that military veterans department was, at least a serious study was done to compare with the relevant economies, what goes to military veterans. I want to say that we're very happy about the delivery of houses. I also want to say that I will convey the condolences from the different parties, again, to the families of the Mabena, to the Mabena kingdom and family. We want to say to you that defense, which sometimes blunders, which sometimes made wrong deed, is taking and has every intention of taking care of the Mabena children and all the other soldiers who die in action. We will not neglect, we will look after our own, black, white, and purple in between. So, Chairperson, I just wanted to say thank you for all who wish us well, and thank you for all who also criticize us, because criticism is good to build. We will not expend what is not in the budget line. That is my first learning of whatever finance. If it is out of the budget line, they know I'm the first one to scream. We will go after skills as we are going into the interviews to get a properly trained CFO. We will make sure that not only do we say that people must go and be taught procurement processes, they will also be taught the basics of finances, so that we come back and we do not go back to you and say, the misstatements are not largely because of corruption. Sometimes it is because of missing receipts, things. The Auditor General says to me, you go to base A, they have borrowed base C equipment. Base C, instead of taking it back to A, borrows it to another. At that time, it cannot be accounted for. It is not therefore that they have lost or they have stolen everything that we accuse them of. So for that, I want to say, may the soldier in South Africa get the respect. May we continue to rely and respect those who are prepared to lay down their lives for us. I'm sorry, the time is up, so I cannot respond to all the other questions. And I'm hoping that you will continue to give the support, not necessarily to the ministry, to the soldier, because that is where the pride of serving must go. Thank you, Chairperson.
Honorable members, earlier on I made an undertaking that I will come back to the House on 2 issues. The first one was a point of order relating to the opportunity being given to Honorable Hendricks to speak. The second one is what it was on the word FACOL. So as far as Honorable Hendricks is concerned, the research I have done says that Honorable Hendricks was part of the original speakers list agreed to and approved by Parliament. Honorable Hendricks earlier on had brought to the attention of Parliament that he will be held up elsewhere and he will not make it to come to the debates or participate in the debates. As a consequence of that, his name was then removed from the final list. During the proceedings of the debates, Honorable Hendricks brought to the attention of the Speaker's office that he is now in a position to speak. So having weighed the two, the fact that he was in the original list, he had the intention to participate in the debate, and the fact that we must allow honorable members here to express themselves and represent their parties and their constituencies. That's why I allowed Honorable Hendricks to speak. That's the first one.
Honorable Chair.
The second one.
Honorable Chair. So, Chair.
Yes, Honorable Member.
Sorry to disturb you, but Chair, some of us, Django Hendricks, PAC and others, with one member in Parliament. For example, Ngoga was in this debate, and I feel I'm debate because I have time. Am I not going to be allowed to speak because I was not in the original list? Because I'm always available in all these debates and I can speak if I'm there. I don't think this thing was necessary. Why would I tell every house or every debate that I'm going to participate, when in fact there's only one member of the PAC? Now we are adjourning. I must quickly run to another committee. And then if I found that it's not the PAC, I must be allowed to speak.
Are you done, Honorable Member?
I'm done. I'm trying to say it's if Uright Lomfo, hereby unfair good London.
Okay. Honorable members, I was given the responsibility to preside last week on some of the budgets. And there's a matter which I was not supposed to say, but I'll say it now that you are raising something else, Honorable Member. During that debate, it was brought to my attention that the reason why Honorable Hendricks could not adhere to some of the agreements made is because he was unwell. He had undergone an operation. So based on that, I understood where he was coming from. So because I know his situation from last week, and I'm presiding now, it doesn't surprise me much that he may have been earlier on felt that he's not maybe feeling well to speak, but along the way, he felt that he must participate. So I just thought you must understand the broader context, why I allowed Honorable Hendricks to speak. Thank you very much. On the second matter, relating to FACOL, the genesis, yes, the genesis of the word FACOL is Afrikaans. So its genesis is born from the Afrikaans language. That's the first thing about it, right? The second thing about it is that if you go into what is called the Urban Dictionary, you will find there where they defined FACOL. And the Urban Dictionary says FACOL means exactly what the Honorable Minister was saying, that it's nothing, there is nothing. So it's not an offensive word, it's not a swear word, and that's how I will suggest that we understand that particular word, honorable members. Now, just before we adjourn, be reminded, okay, honorable member?
Thank you, Chairperson. That's fine. It's just a clarity. There are two variations which have now been used. One by the Minister in Afrikaans, the other by you in English. Are you saying that your ruling stands both in English and in Afrikaans?
Yeah, the both official languages. I said that the word is focal. Other people pronounce it as focal. There are people who say Mahuma Pilu, others say Mahuma Pilu, right? So I don't think there's a difference between what I was saying and what Honorable Minister was saying. But for your convenience, it stays what I've given as an explanation in Afrikaans and in English. Now, honorable members, I want to bring to your attention the following. The first is that the debate on police, including Independent Police Investigate Directorate and Civil Secretariat for the Police Service budget vote will take place at 2:00, Good Hope Chamber. Secondly, debate on science and innovation budget vote will take place at 2:00, Committee Room M46. This concludes the debate and the business of the mini plenary is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.